All right, I might get started then. So thanks for coming along, everyone. My name's Thomas Welsh, and I'm going to be talking to you a little bit today about games writing, in particular, writing cyberpunk games. I'm going to hold my mouse and see if I can just click it like this. I think that should work for me. So just to tell you a little bit about where I work and what I do, I've written for a number of games companies. Ion Lands is who I wrote Cloudpunk with, who I'm going to kind of talk about a little bit later. Rogueside Games, and also I have my own development studio, which I've started recently, which is called Box of Greebles. If you look for them, you won't find much about them yet, because we're just getting started. But I'm going to talk a little bit today about, I guess, a retrospective about a game that I wrote called Cloudpunk, and just about how I got into games writing, and maybe if you're interested in the same thing, this will be useful for you. So I normally start with who are you and what are you doing here. I'll turn this a wee bit, maybe you can see it better. Yeah, so this is me with some of my fellow writers. This is me with Carol, Stark and Ben, and this is actually the core of our development studio, Box of Greebles, as well. But the four of us work together as writers on a game called Nivalis, which is coming out this year. Hopefully, if all goes to plan, it's due to come out this year. And it's a really big game. It's lots of work. It's got a mainstream publisher, and it's kind of an unofficial kind of follow-on from Cloudpunk, set in the same universe. And that game was an independent game, Cloudpunk, and it did really well. So it led us to be able to work on Nivalis, which is much bigger and more ambitious and that kind of thing. Yeah, so I normally start with who are you and what are you doing here, or who's that guy in the ugly sweater and what is he talking about? I'm not wearing an ugly sweater today. I have ugly dungarees instead. But yeah, normally wearing some kind of brightly coloured sweater during one of these talks. So a little bit about how I got here. So this is kind of my route through games writing, publishing, and also through games development. So I started, first of all, writing for a games website called Calm Down Tom. And I was on some podcasts as well. So that's kind of how I got my start. At the time, I was studying my PhD in artificial intelligence, which I dropped out of. That was a really good career move. Who wants to be rich doing artificial intelligence? Not me, apparently, because I didn't do that. I kind of lost interest. And instead, I started working on my own games, games writing, I suppose, games reviews and stuff. From there, I went on and did some writing for some publications like Kotaku and Unwinnable magazine, some kind of mainstream games review sites and news sites, just to get a bit more experience. But I always kind of wanted to do writing and creative writing, storytelling and that kind of thing. So after doing that for a while, I started doing some games writing, and I started doing some short story writing. So the first prize that I got was for something called the Elbow Room Short Fiction Prize. So that was a short story that I wrote, and that kind of started my my fiction writing career. So 2016, I'm 45 now, so you can see it took me a while to get started. So if any of you haven't started writing yet, it's never too late to start. I didn't start until about 8 years ago, and I'm still doing okay at it. It just took me a while to get there. So there we go. From writing short stories, I went on and wrote some novels. So I wrote Anna and Dreaming as my first novel, and they've got that really nice of them to put it in the gift store today. So if anyone's picking up any books, if you want, I can sign this for you. If you get a copy today, no problem at all. Just make sure you write your name down for me, because I keep getting people's names wrong when I write them in the books. But this was my first novel. It was really fun to write. It's all about creativity and artists changing the world, kind of literally changing the world. So in Metic's Fade and Anna and Dreaming, it's about artists who can paint, dance, sew, or sing new realities. So that's what the story's about. From there, I went on and did some other short stories just to kind of, I don't know, get a bit better at short story writing. If any of you are interested in kind of creative writing, I think short stories is a really good way to hone your craft. You can't really have any fat in your work. It has to be all really good, really polished, really well written. I think there's no space for kind of messing around in short stories. So it really helps you develop that. I then went back and I wrote the other books in the Metic's Fade trilogy. So books 2 and 3 are out already. So that was good that I managed to finish those. And then from there, I went on and started writing in games. So there's 4 games here, kind of some of the most prominent ones that I've worked on. So Cloudpunk was the first one, and it did really well. It was kind of like picked by some, websites as their game of the year. Came out around the same time as a big game called Cyberpunk 2047, which we'll talk about a bit about later. kind of was counter-programming to that, a very different kind of game, albeit set in the same genre. Nivalis, as I said, is coming soon. Best Served Cold is a game about solving murders while working as a bartender in a kind of alternate history Europe. And Service with a Shotgun is about working in a gun shop during a zombie apocalypse. So a real range of different things I've worked on. Today's talk is about non-violent games and writing non-violent games though, so not much shotguns and zombies in this one. So the real question that I guess my talk is about today is how do you make people care about this? This is Rania from Cloudpunk. It's a voxel-based game, so it's very simple visuals, very straightforward kind of visual style, and kind of charming in its own way, but not very advanced. So how do you make people care about this without this? This is a gun. Without necessarily killing this. This is Camus from Cloudpunk. So Camus is your robot dog car and your side kick in Cloudpunk, and it makes sense in the game that you have a robot dog car, but we did have a limited run of like these little plushies that people could buy because people really like Camus from the game. Now, whenever I was writing Cloudpunk, one of the things that our director said at the time is like, I really want to make people cry, which is ironic because I think more people cried that were making the game than people that played the game. But the thing about Cloudpunk was he really wanted this emotional connection. So initially what he said is like, we'll have a really cute, engaging companion character, sidekick, dog, but then we kill them and then the player will be really upset. Now, I won't spoil it and tell you whether the dog dies or not, but I will say that like we did find more sophisticated ways to emotionally engage the player than just killing your dog. I'm not going to guarantee the safety of anyone in the story, though. You'll have to play it to see. So our other question was, can voxels make you cry? Can this funny voxel character make you cry? Now, bearing in mind we came out at the same time as Cyberpunk 2047, sorry. It's the most expensive game ever made at the time, biggest advertising budget, more expensive than most Hollywood movies that were out that year, possibly all of the Hollywood movies that were out that year. And we were competing with that. So how does Rania, right here, compete with Keanu Reeves, who was in Cyberpunk 2047? Suffice it to say he's not in Cloudpunk, but, he might be in one of my games one day. Well, to explain that, first of all, we must take a hero's journey. No, I'm only kidding. So if anyone knows anything about storytelling at all, they've maybe heard about the hero's journey quite a lot. You can go away and read about it. It is kind of interesting. But I think it's maybe an over-applied kind of way of understanding story. So there's no hero's journey for today. No heroes, no guns, just delivery drivers. And yeah, I'll explain that in a minute. So how do we make an exciting game with no combat? That was kind of part of the tricky part of making Cloudpunk. How do we make conversations interesting? I think asking that question is part of the solution. And it's this idea of like conversations, like, does a game need to have conversations even if people are talking? And this is how we designed Cloudpunk and Nivalis as well. You don't have conversations. So we talk about writing a game that doesn't have any conversations. Whenever people are speaking in Nivalis and Cloudpunk, in any of my games, they're not having a conversation. They're not just having a chat. They're breaking up, they're being arrested, they're going through border checks, okay? So all of these things we like to consider this idea of like, if you oversaw this, would you think those people are having a conversation? Now, if we looked out the window just now and we saw two people screaming and shouting at each other, one of them took off their wedding ring and threw it on the ground and says like, I'm done with you. You'd say, that's a breakup, they're having a breakup. You wouldn't say, oh, they're having an interesting conversation. It's the same with like, someone was being handcuffed and put in the back of a van and he was screaming, I didn't do it. You wouldn't say that police officer and that unshaven gentleman are having a conversation. You'd say they're being arrested. All these dramatic situations, going through a border check where you're having your passport checked. You wouldn't say that's a conversation. You would say that's a border check. That's like this different thing that's more interesting. And I've got more of these. Being threatened. So again, if someone's threatening someone else, grabbing their shirt, pushing them up against the wall, in an overt way, or even just saying something, like a kind of mobster character in the game saying like, there'll be repercussions for this choice that you're making. Like, you might not see another day or something like that. this is a threat. And again, yeah, we have this story. The reason that I say dominatrixes and then dominatrices at the top is I don't know the pluralization of this word. But we have this weird story with a kind of sex worker in Cloudpunk, and she's waiting for a client to turn up and she doesn't. And she just talks about the everyday realities of her job. She's like, I go, I meet people. And it's quite nice because I thought that character was fun and interesting. And I actually got a message from two dominatrices that work in New York that said, we really liked that like honest depiction of like a sex worker that wasn't just kind of funny or mocked or talked down to. So that was nice. Planning revolution, there's a lot of stuff in Cloudpunk about class struggle, about revolution. There's also a scene where you get drugged by a package that you're carrying. So the Cloudpunk again is about being a delivery driver, a regular person. You're not a cyborg cop, you're not a bounty hunter, you're not a criminal, you're just a delivery driver. And at one point you get drugged by some package that has fumes coming out of it and the screen goes all crazy and you start talking woozy and stuff. It's a really fun bit. And again, class warfare. All things that you don't normally consider to be regular conversations. So when I was writing Cloudpunk, we talk about this idea of gameplay verbs. So when you're working in game design, the verbs are what you do. You know, so if you think about Mario, there's actually quite a lot. You know, it's a simple game, but there's jump, there's run, there's walk, there's shoot a fireball, there's hop, there's duck. You know, there's a lot of things that you can actually do, even in a simple game like Mario. In Cloudpunk, we had hardly any. We had 1.5 gameplay verbs. You could go to one place or another place, so that's really what you could do. Even in choices, we didn't have dialogue choices. We could just fly to different locations. So if someone said, this package might have a bomb in it, you should either deliver it to the train station, but you might blow lots of people up, or throw it in the trash, but then you'll get in trouble with your client. You were just choosing where you went, so that's how you made that choice, literally where you chose to go in the game. So that's our 1.5 gameplay verbs, drive there or drive to that other place. But I don't think it would have been easier for me to write Cloudpunk if my gameplay verb was shoot this guy, okay? So if I had a gun, if you had a gun in that game, I don't think that would have been more interesting. In some ways, that would have been less engaging. So we had this idea with Cloudpunk where conversations can be fights and words are weapons. And I've got some examples of this. These are really engaging, kind of witty but savage conversations from fiction. So I don't know if does anyone recognize this one from Mad Men? It's this line. So I don't know if you can see it, but he says, "I don't think about you at all." So it's this this kind of conflict between Don Draper, the main character, and this kind of junior copywriter who's very talented and kind of a threat to Don, or he thinks he's a threat. And there's this back and forward, and you know, this character says, "I feel sorry for you" to Don, you know, trying to make him feel bad. And Don says, "I don't think about you at all." It's just like a great kind of comeback that minimizes this character. It's like, it's felt like a gut punch of dialogue. You know, he just kind of brushes him away with words. There's no guns here, there's no shooting. It's just two characters side by side in the lift. It's a really savage delivery. This is from Game of Thrones. This is Lady, not Marjorie, Marjorie's mother, the Tyrell, Lady Tyrell. And she's saying here, "Tell Cersei I want her to know it was me." So at this point in the story, this character's actually been killed off. But her last words, again, are like this savage kind of like delivery that she was the one that was behind the poisoning earlier in the story. She was the one that kind of orchestrated all of this. In a way, she kind of wins, just with a few words delivered before her death. And then we have a scene from the new Dune movie, and this is where Paul Atreides says, "May thy blade chip and shatter." Is it? Oh, "May thy knife chip and shatter." So this comes before a big knife fight, which is really fun and exciting, you know, and it's a cool knife fight. But actually, in this case, the most savage thing that happens is this statement, this line. This comes from the Fremen and the people that trained Paul. And it's quite funny because the bad guy here just repeats the same thing back. It's like he can't one-up him in this fight. And in a way, Paul's kind of won this fight before it even happens. He's just kind of dismissed him. So yeah. So I think every good fight is a conversation. I think even whenever we have these fights, you know, in action movies where there's martial arts, it is two viewpoints clashing. And at their best, they can be that more than just, you know, fists flying. So I think it's easier to tell a story with sentences than bullets. That's kind of my philosophy around this. So how, like in a practical sense, Tom explained how So I ask myself this whenever I'm working on these kind of interesting conversations. When is a conversation not a conversation? There's a few times interviewing a suspect is a great one to build tension. You know, you've all seen crime fiction. This is what you might think of as just two characters speaking or talking, but there's all sorts of stakes involved here. Someone's freedoms involved. Their attempt to lie or get off the hook for a crime, or if they're wrongfully accused, to defend themselves. That's very engaging for a player or for a viewer. Flirting, again, is really an interesting thing for anyone. So I've been in restaurants where, I've heard two people kind of chatting and flirting, and maybe it's a first date, and that's always interesting. Can't help but tune in. Same if you hear two people breaking up. That was the other one. I've been in a restaurant where two people were talking about all the reasons that, the relationship was over, and they were talking really loudly. And when that's happening, I think it's just human nature. We want to know, well, what's happening there, what they're talking about. Especially if you're a writer, you use all this stuff in your stories, don't you? Any last words, things that are said? Therapy is another thing that is very engaging. It's very interesting to hear people being open and engaged in these interactions where two people are communicating, but there's an unequal power balance, and it's, they're talking about something beyond just chat, just conversation. So one of the things that I try and do with my writing is challenge the player's values and beliefs. And we talk about this with Cloudpunk and Nivalis as creating personality quiz conversations. So with Cloudpunk, we didn't have choices in conversations, but with Nivalis and the other games I've worked on, we actually do have that ability to choose what you say. So often whenever we're interacting with characters in those games that I work on, the questions that they're asking you are challenging not just the player, but your personal beliefs about things. So they're quite difficult questions, and ones that are emotive, that have strong opinions associated with them. So these are some examples of questions that I literally have in games that I've written. So in Best Served Cold, for example, which is a game about people meeting at a bar and chatting and getting to know each other, but you're also solving crimes. There's two characters having this conversation. Can you be friends with someone after you break up with them? And one of the characters is just saying, like, no, it never works out. You shouldn't try and do it. It's always difficult. It always causes problems. It's better to have a clean break. And the other character is saying, well, actually, if you're friends with someone, you were with them for a long time, why shouldn't you be friends with them anymore? Like, friendship's different from romance, all these different things. So even if I'm saying that, maybe you have, each of you, different ideas about what the response is to this, where you'd lie. Whether you're like, nope, she split up with someone, never talk to them again. Or whether you're like, well, I split up with someone and we're still good friends now. These are the questions emotionally engaged players or viewers or anyone engaging with your story. And then there's philosophical or social things like freedom. Is it more important than safety? So there's constant debates in Cloudpunk and Nivalis about the kind of corporate oversight and how everyone feels kind of safe, although not that safe because it's still a bit of a dystopia. But also they've given away a lot of their freedoms. Is that worthwhile? And then, of course, situations that probably occurred in Jane Austen novels all the time. How do you deal with rich corporate executives on a poverty safari when they hack your robot dog car? Again, happens in Cloudpunk. It doesn't happen in every story, but more than you'd think. More of mine's anyway. So how did I figure all of this out? How did I come to this kind of approach? Well, from Cloudpunk to Nivalis, I kind of reverse engineered my own process. I wrote Cloudpunk by myself, but Nivalis, I have a writing team. So I had to think about how I wrote this dialogue and these concepts and how they came into my writing and how I could communicate them to other people so that they could use them too. So there was a few things that I kind of had as rules for the writers. One of them is to write stuff that's funny and not zany. So I think you can be light-hearted and humorous and darkly humorous, and even a bit absurd, and still keep the player on board. But I think when you get zany, you kind of lose people. So I would say that the difference for me is that in Cloudpunk and Nivalis, all the characters take themselves seriously, but the situations are ridiculous. So if you meet a character who's really out there, really weird, really unusual, they don't think they're weird. They think they're perfectly normal. They have their own justification. They think everything that they're saying makes sense. You might think, that character is absolutely, really weird, says the strangest things, has a really big, larger than life personality. But to them, those characters, they don't find themselves ridiculous. They're not in the joke. The joke comes from the situations. And And I think that whenever I do sci-fi writing in particular, what I'm doing is reflecting, not referencing the real world. So for the writers, often they would write something that was maybe kind of like ripped from the headlines. You know, there's a story this week about whatever, Trump not getting a Nobel Peace Prize. That's ridiculous and nonsense situation, crazy world we live in. So you might think, oh, well, that, you know, I'll do a story about a, you know, despotic president who's taken over and he wants to get a peace prize even though, you know, he does all these terrible things. It's maybe just a bit too close to home. But if you kind of remove it and think, well, what's ridiculous about that situation? And you don't have to have a character called, I don't know, like instead of Elon Musk, he's called Elon Tusk and he's a terrible tech billionaire. You can be a bit more subtle and think about, well, what's ridiculous about that situation that's inherent to his character that's universal? You know, like a billionaire being out of touch with regular people and trying to save the world with ideas that will make it much worse. That's universal. That's happened throughout time. Maybe not the tech part, but you know, the rest kind of makes sense. So if you're reflecting stuff in the real world, you should do that with sci-fi writing in particular, but make sure that you're a few steps removed from like the details of reality. And I've got here, don't be too self-aware, don't lampshade too hard. And again, some of these things are a personal thing or a taste thing, but I don't like the reader kind of winking at the player too often or the reader. I think like just kind of breaking the fourth wall is not something that features in a lot of my games, and I think doing it a little bit can be fine, but too liberally starts to undermine the foundations of the world that you're building. So for the writing that I'm doing, we're not being too self-aware, we're not winking too hard at the player. And this is lampshading. I don't know if you know it from writing. Yeah, some of you probably do. So it's this idea of knowing that something's wrong with your story, but you kind of make the characters notice it so that you kind of get yourself off the hook. So they do this a lot in Marvel movies where something silly's happening, but then the character says that it's silly. You know, so like Tony Stark will say something in an Avengers movie like, someone says, who is that guy? And Tony Stark says, that's a wizard who came from, you know, space and we have to fight him. And you're like, oh, that's funny. But it's pointing out that like the situation's ridiculous, so you're kind of getting off the hook for the silliness of the situation, which they do pretty well, I think, sometimes anyway. But I think you can do that a little bit, but if you're calling attention to the silly things in your story constantly by characters saying, oh, this doesn't make any sense, but I guess we'll go with it, eventually, yeah, that starts to undermine the foundations of the story too. So do that only when necessary. And this is a really key point, and I guess in a practical point of view, I think this is something that I wish I knew earlier, and something that I would say to anyone who's writing collaboratively or in a team or, you know, involved in anything where you're making stuff that's, in particular, stuff that's funny. If something's funny, you need to remember that it was funny, especially if you're working with a team of people, because you'll forget that it was funny, and then it won't be funny to you anymore, and then you'll keep rewriting the joke to be less and less funny, but still fresh. Same with things that are dramatic or shocking. A dramatic twists in a story, you'll remember them, and then they won't shock you, but the player, the reader, hasn't experienced that yet. So you need to remember your first reaction. There's a tendency for us all when we're creating stories to go back and change things to make them fresher and more interesting to us again, because we're bored with them. But the player or the person experiencing that story hasn't had that experience. And this is never more true than with jokes, which are only funny when you hear them. So if you're working in a writer's room and someone comes up with a joke and everyone laughs, you need to be like, write down that was funny, because you'll all forget that it was funny, and then you'll rewrite it to be less good over time. So a practical thing. Yeah, and this is basically the same thing again. You'll become bored with your best ideas because of recency bias. That doesn't mean those ideas are bad. That just means you've experienced them and they're not exciting to you anymore. But unless your game's out there, unless your book's out there, no one else has experienced them, yes. And this is a lesson from improv comedy. Not that I have a tremendous amount of experience with improv comedy, but they have this thing in improv comedy where you don't say no and stop creativity. So if someone passes you a shoebox and says, this is the treasure, this is the Ark of the Covenant, what are you going to do with it? In improv comedy, you don't say, no, it's not, it's a shoebox, because you've killed the whole kind of enthusiasm. When someone has an idea in writing, you kind of yes-and it. They're like, well, what if we did this? The best thing you can do is kind of add to that instead of being like, I'm not sure about that. And there's a lot of kind of work that I do on creativity that I was talking about today as well, about building on ideas and not popping idea bubbles, which I'll mention a wee bit later. Oh, I'll mention now. So sorry about this traumatizing gif. This is a little raccoon who's washing his candy floss in water, and then it's very sad. So it gives the same idea of like this idea of an idea bubble. So when I'm writing, when I'm working with young writers in particular, but any writing team, I talk about when someone has an idea, that idea is like a bubble. And when they share it, they kind of expose a part of themselves. And it's very easy to pop that bubble. So it's very easy to be like, oh, I'm not sure about that. Or like, oh, that won't work because we had something else in the story later. Or that's too similar to something else. So you can very quickly stop an idea from growing into something. Like you're digging the seed out of the ground, to use another metaphor, before it grows into a tree. You have to give it a chance to kind of grow. So with my writing rooms, and whenever I work with young writers, I always say that you do yes and you don't pop the idea bubble. So when they have an idea, you just kind of say, okay, and you give them some positive feedback about it. Like, yeah, we can do that, and also this, build on it. Don't know why I'm doing that. Space bar there. So anyway, I'm going to take you back a little bit. I'm also going to check my time to make sure that I've got time here. Yes, we're good. So I'm going to go back and talk about a part of the development of Cloudpunk when we were kind of second guessing ourselves about having no guns, no violence, no fighting in it. And I'll say that this particular part of my life is a bit hazy because I was having no sleep at this time because this is what I was doing. So I wrote Cloudpunk when Eva, my daughter, was this size, so about 4 months or so there. So I was quite tired when I was doing this, so I'm amazed that I managed to get the game finished at all. But this is a little kind of back and forward between me and the studio lead at the time. And what I'm saying here just now is like, I think the feedback's really useful because we got some feedback saying, the game was kind of not quite working at the time. So I said, there's definitely some good points. At the end of the day, the gameplay loop does consist of a relatively small number of gameplay verbs. We're either driving somewhere to pick something up or dropping something off. So at this point, we're like, is this enough? Is this enough to make a game? And we really weren't sure. And I says, throughout the design process, we've rolled out shooting and combat, time limits or racing, and difficult driving decisions because, again, we don't think those are enjoyable gameplay experiences for us. We didn't like those types of games, so we didn't want to make one. Along the way, there will be more things to explore, items that you find, or people that you meet to unlock side stories. Our ultimate goal is to create a complex narrative picture of this city you're in. The decisions that you make will have you challenge your morals, sometimes even feel uneasy, sometimes proud, and just sometimes sad. So this is a long time ago I wrote this, before I guess I had a lot of those ideas developed, but it still shows that I was still thinking about the importance of the storytelling there, aside from, fighting and guns and stuff. So we did think, should we put just a wee bit of shooting in it, just a few bits with guns? And we decided no, because when we thought what that would add to what we already had, we couldn't think of anything. We said that like bullets would be full stops to stories. They just stopped them, and we wanted to build those stories into a reality. And we also thought about police in the headlines, and maybe those stories didn't resonate with us at the time. If we wanted to say something about police in the world, I guess we didn't want to say they're cool and shooting people is fun, because that's not really how we felt. So we thought more about branching dialogue, choices, and simulations. And that's when we came up with the idea of Novalis. So before Cloudpunk was even finished, we had the idea for Novalis. So there's a couple of clips here. One of the things that I especially like is this section of dialogue from Andrea, who's the voice actor for the main character in Cloudpunk, and I'm going to play it in a minute. And Andrea, as you can see, won an award for Best Vocal Performance. Sorry, it's very small. But she also won an award for Best Outtake. So for a line of dialogue that was a funny outtake. And I'll play it for you here. Basically, she had to deliver this line where she said something about a dress. So like the story in the character, the story was this character had bought a dress for his wife, and it was like this weird high-tech futuristic material that once you wore it, you had to wear it forever. And then he tried it on himself, and now he couldn't take it off. And for some reason, Andrea couldn't talk about this without cracking up. So we're like, we just need you to say it clearly one time to get it, and she just could not get it. So this is kind of what it sounded like. See if I can get it here.
You should take off the dress. She says 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 you should take off the dress.
So we got there in the end. My favourite bit is when she tries to calm herself down. She goes, and she still can't do it. So I guess one of the things that's amazing about working in games, and I don't want to say it's working in games is better than books because there's good things about each. But the thing is, when you write a novel, what you get out of it is like, you know, people read it and they say that they like it. Hopefully, you get some Amazon reviews. That's affirmation you get. But with games, you get to see people play it and how they play it. And then you also get to hear how the voice actors deliver lines. And it's just so good to hear. You can grab a seat, yeah. It's just great to hear how they do it. It adds so much life to the game, you know.
So you should take off.
So some practical considerations here. This is just about what writing for games was like for me. First of all, writing in spreadsheets is no fun, right? But if you work in games, you might end up writing in spreadsheets at some point. So we wrote the whole of Cloudpunk in a Google Doc. Thankfully, we have like these other tools that we use for Nivalis and other games like Arcweave or Artisy, all these really cool, sophisticated writing tools. But when we did Cloudpunk, we had a spreadsheet, so it was really tricky to follow. It's hard, especially when you're doing choices and where they jump to and stuff. But we did our best. We did it in a spreadsheet and it worked. So you don't need expensive or complete or complex narrative tools to tell a complex story, but it does help. So a couple of wee takeaways for you. When it comes to writing, stay true to your vision, even when you feel like diluting your core idea may be easier. So for us, for Cloudpunk, we got really far with this idea of conversation being a regular delivery driver, but still at the end, we're like, there's a reason no one does this kind of game. Maybe we should just give you a gun and you shoot cyborgs. And we didn't do that, and I'm really glad that we stuck to our guns. And here's the secret. So this is for all dialogue, and this, I think, is universal. I think this goes beyond games. I think it goes into script writing, comic writing, novel writing, TV writing, anything where you're doing writing with interactions between characters. Just don't have conversations. No conversations are needed. Instead, write battles, mysteries, foreplay, a hunt, a philosophical debate, freestyle slam poetry about anarchism, which we do have in Cloudpunk, or a joke. All these different things you can write, just don't write conversations. Don't overwrite. If it made you laugh, cry, or smile once, that's enough. So remember those reactions, especially for jokes. If they're funny, just stick with them, don't change them. Don't show your friends your butt, okay? So yes, and your friends right, and when they have a great idea, don't say but, don't say reasons that it can't work, build on it and give them ideas that it can. And finally, you don't need Keanu Reeves in your game to make it a success, but it probably doesn't hurt. Thanks very much.